Hello and welcome to Chapter 6. We're going to cover the first 2 years in cognitive development. What questions will be answered in this chapter? Why did Piaget compare 1-year-olds to scientists? What factors influence whether infants remember what happens to them before they can talk? And when and how do infants learn to talk? We'll start with sensory motor intelligence. This is Piaget's term for the way infants think by using their senses and motor skills during the first period of cognitive development. Piaget felt that infants were active learners. He used a word called adaptation, and it is the core of intelligence. And cognition develops in 4 distinct periods. Continuing on with sensory motor intelligence, Piaget also used the terms assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is Piaget's term for a type of adaptation in which new experiences are interpreted to fit into or assimilate with old ideas. With the word accommodation, this is Piaget's term for a type of adaptation in which old ideas are restructured to include or accommodate new experiences. The never-ending circular reactions. Circular reactions keep going because each action produces pleasure that encourages more action. The examples here, first one is feels good to keep sucking on the thumb, the other is a rattle and knocking over these blocks. Each one produces a reaction, the baby is interested and then continues on. Again, with sensory motor intelligence, stages 1 and 2 include primary circular reactions, as I was just talking about. Circular reactions are an interaction of sensation, perception, and cognition. Primary circular reactions include 2 stages of sensory motor intelligence involving the infant's own body. Stage 1 is from birth to 1 month, and this is the stage of reflexes. Stage 2 is from 1 month to 4 months. As first acquired adaptations or habits. In every aspect of sensory motor intelligence, the brain and the senses interact with experiences, each shaping the other as part of a dynamic system. Infants adapt reflexes through information from repeated responses, and once an adaptation occurs, it persists. Sucking is a reflex at first, but adaptation begins as soon as the infant differentiates a pacifier from her mother's breast or realizes that her hand has grown too big to fit into her mouth. This infant's expression of concentration suggests that she is about to make the adaptation and suck just her thumb from now on. Moving on to stages 3 and 4 of secondary circular reactions. Secondary circular reactions are interactions between the baby and something else, and mirror neurons begin to function. The second of 3 types of feedback loops in sensory motor intelligence, this one involving people and objects. Infants respond to other people, to toys, and to any other object they can touch or move. Stage 3 lasts from 4 to 8 months and attempts to make interesting things last as their goal. And stage 4, which is from 6 to 12 months, a new adaptation and anticipation, a means to the end. All right, moving on to goal-directed behavior. This is purposeful action that benefits from new motor skills resulting from brain maturation. And object permanence, which is a realization that objects or people continue to exist when they are no longer in sight. This is the basis of a game that we play with our children. It's called Peekaboo, and it makes all 3 happy, each for cognitive reasons. The 9-month-old is discovering object permanence. His sister, in terms of this picture here, at the concrete operational stage, enjoys making her brother laugh, and their mother understands more abstract ideas, such as family bonding. The baby's obvious goal seeking stems from 1. An enhanced awareness of cause and effect, and 2. Memory for actions already completed, and 3. Understanding of other people's intentions. And moving on to stages 5 and 6, tertiary circular reactions. It's just a fancy word for third. Tertiary circular reactions involve active exploration and experimentation, exploration of range of new activities and variations in responses as a way of learning. Stage 5, which is from 12 to 18 months, a new means through active exploration, the little scientist. Stage 6 lasts from 18 to 24 months, involves mental combinations, intellectual experimentation via imagination, and deferred imitation. Piaget was right to describe babies as avid and active learners who learn so fast and so well. His main mistake was underestimating how rapidly their learning occurs. All right, moving on to information processing. This is an approach. It is modeled on computer functioning. It involves incremental details and step-by-step description of mechanisms of thought, and adds insight to understanding of cognition at every age. It theorizes signs of attention correlate with later cognitive ability. All right, continuing on with information processing. Affordances concern perception, or input. Perception requires selectivity. Affordances provide opportunity for perception and interaction that is offered by a person, place, or object in the environment. What next? Information processing research asks what these babies are thinking as they both pull on the same block. Will those thoughts lead to hitting, crying, or sharing? Selection of which affordance is perceived and acted upon is related to 4 factors: sensory awareness, immediate motivation, maturation, and experience. It is also characteristic of every age and every culture. All right, covering some research on early affordances. The visual cliff. This is an experimental apparatus that gives the illusion of a sudden drop-off between one horizontal surface and another. Infant performance depends on past experience, including social context. This toddler is in a laboratory in Berkeley, California, is crawling on the experimental apparatus called a visual cliff. She stops at the edge of what she perceives as a drop-off. The difference is in processing, not input, and in affordance, not mere stimulus. All right, we'll talk about memory now as it develops in these first parts. Memory improves with maturation. In the first weeks, recognition of caregivers by face, voice, and smell can occur. At 3 months, motor memories develop. And at 9 months, more complex memories develop. There's also something called infant amnesia. In terms of implicit memory, it begins at 3 months and is stable at 9 months. Explicit memory takes longer to emerge. All right, and condition of memory includes motivations and emotions. Retrieval is strengthened by reminders and repetition. And changes in brain dendrites and neurons facilitate this improved memory. Older infants retain information longer with less training or reminding. Memory improves by 9 months. At 1 year, babies can transfer learning from objects and experiences and remember patterns. In some infant memory research, they covered instrumental learning. In one experiment, a young infant immediately remembers how to make the familiar mobile move. Reminders reinforce learning. Unfamiliar mobiles do not provoke the same reaction. Infants are fascinated by moving objects within a few feet of their eyes. That's why parents buy mobiles for cribs, and why in this experiment the experimenter tied a string to a mobile and a baby's leg to test memory. Babies not in this experiment, like this one, sometimes flail their limbs to make their cribs shake and thus make their mobiles move. Piaget's stage of making interesting sights last is evident to every careful observer. And now moving on to language, what develops in the first 2 years. Before birth, language learning via brain organization and hearing. It may be innate. For the newborn, preference for speech sounds and mother's language, and gradual selective listening. Around 6 months, their ability to distinguish sounds and gestures in their own language emerges. Early stages of language involve communication through noises, gestures, and facial expressions. Timing of language acquisition varies, but the sequence is universal. Listening and responding. Newborns prefer to listen to the language their mother spoke when they were in the womb. This is the language from everyday life. Newborns with bilingual mothers show language preferences. They prefer the more heard language. And in child-directed speech, which occurs in every language, this is the high-pitched, simplified, and repetitive ways adults speak to infants and children, often called baby talk or motherese. All right, in terms of understanding speech, habituation is involved. This is becoming accustomed to object or an event after repeated exposure and then becoming less interested. Habituation research can now be used to measure brain activity, fMRI or DTI or other neuroimaging techniques related to language perception and learning. Continuing on with language development. Babbling. This involves repetition of certain syllables such as ba ba ba, and that begins when babies are between 6 and 9 months old. It is experienced expectant and begins to sound like a native language around 12 months. Pronunciation is far more difficult than hand skills, but parents want to know when their babies want more to eat. One solution is evident here. This mother is teaching her 12-month-old daughter to sign for more, a word most toddlers say several months later. This involves gesturing. All infants gesture. Concepts with gesture are expressed sooner than speech. Gesture occurs even without adult signing. Pointing emerges in human babies around 10 months. All right, and in terms of learning language, for the first words, there are gradual beginnings. At about 1 year, babies speak a few words. By 6 to 15 months, they understand 10 times more words than they can produce. At 12 months, they begin to use hollow phrases and recognize vocalization from universal to language specific. Then there's something known as the naming explosion. Once spoken vocabulary reaches about 50 words, it builds quickly at a rate of 50 to 100 words per month. 21-month-olds say twice as many words as an 18-month-old. Cultural differences appear in language use. Cultural and family variation occurs in child-directed speech as well. Universals of infant communication are evident in current research. These are the grunts and other sounds a baby makes to communicate things such as protesting, giving, and requesting something. In research, parents from other cultures could tell what foreign babies were communicating by observing the gestures. They are universal. Music tempo is also culture specific. Making noise is fun, but even infants prefer the noises of their community and do their best to repeat them. In the picture here, this boy has learned to play the bongo drums. Notice the skilled angle of his hands thanks to his grandfather. Grammar, the sequences, prefixes, suffixes, intonation, loudness, verb forms, pronouns, and negations, preposition, and articles all have to be part of language learning, and it includes all the devices by which words communicate meaning. It becomes obvious in hollow phrases used between 18 and 24 months. Proficiency correlates with sentence length. Mean length utterance is measured. All right, lastly, we're going to cover theories of language learning. Theory 1, the infant needs to be taught. B.F. Skinner, a psychologist from around 1957, noticed that spontaneous babbling is usually reinforced. Parents are expert teachers, and other caregivers help them teach children to speak. Frequent repetition of words is instructive, especially when the words are linked to the pleasures of daily life. Well-taught infants become well-spoken children. If adults want children who speak, understand, and later read well, they must talk to their infants. Learning the first 50 words is a milestone in early language acquisition, as it predicts the arrival of the naming explosion and the multi-word sentence a few weeks later. Researchers found that half of the infants of highly responsive mothers, the top 10%, reach this milestone at 15 months. The infants of non-responsive mothers, below the bottom 10%, lagged significantly behind, with half of them at the 50-word level at 21 months. This shows the reinforcement that's happening between the parent and child. All right, and the next theory, social impulses foster infant language, social pragmatic. Infants communicate because humans have evolved as social beings. The emotional messages of speech, not the words, are the focus of early communication. Each culture has practices that further social interaction, including talking. The social content of speech is universal, which is why babies learn whatever specifics their culture provides. And now, theory 3. Infants teach themselves. Language learning is innate. Adults need not teach it, nor is it a byproduct of social interaction. Language itself is experience expectant, although obviously the specific language is experience dependent. Variations in children's language ability correlate with differences in brain activity and perceptual ability. A scientist named Chomsky stated that language is too complex to be mastered through step-by-step conditioning. Language Access Device, or LAD, this is a term for a hypothesized mental structure that enables aspects of grammar, vocabulary, and intonation. All babies are eager learners, and language may be considered one more aspect of neurological maturation. So, which perspective is correct? Well, all perspectives offer insight into language acquisition, and this has brought about a hybrid theory. Some aspects of language learning may be best explained by one theory at one age, and other aspects by another theory at another age. Multiple attentional, social, and linguistic cues contribute to early language, and different elements of the language apparatus may have evolved in different ways, meaning that you can take parts of each of these theories, put them together to understand how these things are happening in the first place. All right, and that concludes the lecture for Chapter 6. Thanks for listening.